Hey, welcome to Unlatched Mind. It's been about a month plus that I've been able to find the time to get another podcast in, but it's just been tough finding the time, but we persevered, and here we are. So anyway, my guest today is Dr. Frank McAndrew. Dr. McAndrew is a professor over at Knox College in Illinois, here in the States. Dr. McAndrew had written an article actually a while ago, it was back in 2015, that I came across. It was titled, If You Give a Man a Gun, The Evolutionary Psychology of Mass Shootings. So, the mass shooting things is very politicized, and it's a huge topic of bipartisan discussion and all that stuff, and we weren't interested at all in going there. But really, the topic of the summary of his article was some of the evolutionary adaptations that males have gone through over the millennia that have more or less adapted the male mind for violence, the male brain for this proclivity towards violence. To be clear, none of this is an excuse for mass shootings. Of course, it's crazy that I even have to say that, but just, we talk about the average, the common profile of individuals that are committing these shootings. Spoiler alert: they're all male. And second spoiler alert: most of the time they're white. Not every time. There's definitely some exceptions we'll talk about, but white males seem to be the main offenders here. But anyway, we dig into some of the evolutionary backing as to why this would be the case. So I really enjoyed the discussion. So let's just jump right in. I give you Dr. Frank McAndrew. Well, Frank, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So I read your article, and as I'm reading it, and the title of it was, and I think you had a few on this topic, but if you give a man a gun, the evolutionary psychology of mass shootings. I think most folks that aren't, obviously the mass shooting things is a huge political conversation. Every time, one of these travesties happen, you get the left, the left takes a stance, the right takes a stance. It's about guns. No, it's about mental illness. That we don't want to get into that. At least I'm not really interested in that whole world, to be honest. Although, once you digging into this topic and just doing a little research prior to this, it's just stunning how everything is politicized. Like, you can't. What I liked about your article, and where I hope our conversation goes, is we don't really care. I don't care if it's not a partisan discussion. You really focus on, hey, men are the ones committing all these crimes. What is it about our evolutionary I say adaptation that's causing men to be so violent?
I was interested when I published that article how many attacks I got from both sides. The people see what they want to see. The people from the right thought I was trying to take their guns away. People from the left thought I was giving people an excuse. So, nobody, that tells me it was probably right on target.
Anyone that would read this and know your intent would not go there. So it blows my mind that they would actually make that accusation. But if you read that, in a bubble, maybe you could say, well, he's saying that this is men are committing these atrocities because they're evolutionary. It's an adaptation, and it's not really their fault. Now, that would be such a far stretch.
I reply to that? I hear that all the time, and it's odd that people use that in situations like this. For example, if we had a disease that we found out had a genetic basis, nobody shrugs their shoulders and says, oh, well, it's genetic. I guess we should just let people die from it.
Right. Yep.
They say, aha, we have learned something important about the cause of this. This may help us find a way to deal with it.
Yep.
And in the context of disease, that seems perfectly appropriate. I don't see any difference here. To identify the way men are put together tells us something about the nature of the problem.
Exactly.
It's not an excuse for them to do it.
Right.
But if you ignore that, you're never going to deal with it very effectively.
Right. No, it's exactly right. You're spot on. I mean, I agree with that 100%. Yeah, it really is that thing where, and I feel like it's popping up in the partisan divide I would say injects itself into everything, right? And I think where I get really frustrated when it affects science, right? And this is exactly a prime example. And I think I'm in the notes I had sent you, I think I touched on it a bunch of times. For me, it jumped out many times where you look at our societal response to things and our societal discussions on things, and it becomes, yep, well, it's either there's too many guns available, or it's a mental illness issue, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if you go through and try to dissect, and try to, I would say, extrapolate the foundational components of why things happen, which is what you did, right? You're going back and looking at the data, trying to understand evolutionary biology and why are men more aggressive. There's legitimate reasons why men are getting into all the fights. They're taking all the risky behaviors. They're I think I made an example on the playground, right? It's the young boys that are trying to hang from one arm upside down. Just trying to look at that, isn't that just more informative? Doesn't that data just help, like you just said, I think this we just alluded to? Why take that next step and saying, and making it political? Like, you're just trying to understand the data to hopefully inform a better solution, at least, right?
Yeah. People are very much on guard against any data that they think might be used against them.
Right.
And so if you're on the right and you're a Second Amendment person, anything that makes it sound like guns are an important part of the problem, you just don't want to go there.
Right.
On the other hand, if you're coming from the left, any data that challenges some of your sacred assumptions are going to be equally undesirable. So, I think there's the stereotype on the left, certainly, that right-wingers ignore science and they ignore facts. Well, people ignore science and they ignore facts when they're inconvenient.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, it's so true. And the whole gun thing, I mean, again, this was and I would say if I would, summarize the article and correct me where I'm wrong, I think this is where a top level kind of prelude to the conversation, you give the, pretty much the evolutionary, I would say, backing to why men are men and why they are more violent and why they are more prone to being more sexually deviant and more violent and more aggressive and looking for status. And then you tie that back into, when you add guns to the mix, right? And you talk through that. So now I think, and it will go kind of all over the place, but I don't think, again, with the gun concept, I think when you added it at the end, I never read one for even not even a minute that you were saying too many guns are a problem. You'd even come close to that. Now you take all this, guns certainly make killing people easier, but you were focused on what would make someone want to commit atrocities, not the ease at which they can do it. The motivation, I think, to folks to want to commit an atrocity, I think, is completely irrelevant. In terms of when you bring in, give them what tools would they have to implement or their desires. I think you would just focus on the desire, not the accessibility of the tools.
I think that's accurate. Although some of the research I've done indicates that just handling a gun does result in a testosterone surge, especially in guys that don't use guns all the time, and it can be an ingredient of the motivation. It can give the guy the guts, basically, to do the thing he's thinking about doing. So the gun doesn't plant the idea in the head, but the gun sort of gives you the energy. Part of the problem with this discussion, politically speaking, people want a simple answer. They want to know the one thing, whether it's guns or mental illness. Right. And in fact, I don't even know how many things there are, dozens. Yes, guns are part of it. In some cases, mental health is part of it. But it's just too simple-minded to say, let's find that one thing and deal with that, and then the problem goes away.
Right. Well, actually, so we can jump to that because, I mean, you did mention a study about men, and were they dismantling a gun or building the gun components, and one set of group was building a mousetrap, or what? Could you explain that study a little bit?
Sure.
That was interesting.
Yeah. We brought guys into the lab, and they thought they were in an experiment that was concerned with if you're really focusing your attention on something, how does that influence your sensory abilities? So they were going to be intently focusing on something and then doing a taste test. And they were randomly assigned to one of two conditions. In the one condition, they had a handgun, and they handled the thing, and they looked at a diagram of it, and they wrote out instructions for how to take it apart and how to put it back together. So they spent a lot of time just handling this thing. The other group was doing the very same thing, but they had the kids' mousetrap game that I think most of us grew up with. Yep. And so they were looking at the parts of that and handling that and writing instructions for how to put that together. After that, they tasted these little cups of water that had some hot sauce in them, rated how some bogus things. And then they were told, we want you to prepare the sample for the next person who's coming in. And they were free to pour as much hot sauce as they wanted into these cups. The guys who handled the gun poured more hot sauce in than the guys who did not. But the interesting part of it is we also measured their testosterone levels before they handled the gun or the mousetrap and after they handled the gun or the mousetraps. It was the raise in testosterone that mediated or caused the change, how much hot sauce they put into the water. And the mousetrap guys, their testosterone levels didn't go up. The gun guys did. What was really interesting, we didn't put this in the journal article, but some of the guys who had added a lot of hot sauce were kind of pissed off when they found out nobody was actually going to drink it. When we debriefed them and told them, they still had this thing going on where, wow, they wanted to get somebody. So there's an actual biological effect of handling a weapon. Right. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go out and kill people, but it's for the right guy in the right situation. It's part of the equation.
How large were these sample sets? Just curious, how many guys were?
There were approximately 20 some guys in each group.
Okay. Interesting. Now, I wonder, just extrapolate a little bit. I wonder there were no females in the study, obviously, because it sounds like you were mostly testosterone focused and whatnot, but I wonder how that would,
Well, the reason for that, because women don't have testicles, they don't have the capacity to generate big surges of testosterone.
Right.
So if you're doing a study where you're looking at the effects of testosterone, women have some very low levels of testosterone floating around in them, but they don't have the capacity for it to really jump when something happens. And that's another thing that kind of gets lost in testosterone conversations. It isn't exactly the amount of testosterone a guy's walking around with. It's these surges of testosterone that result in the behavior.
Yeah, to be totally honest, I didn't even know testosterone had that surging effect. I thought we all had, base levels of it in our bloodstream and whatnot, and as you get older, it tends to wane, and I didn't know. So it literally is a kind of ebb and flow thing, and it can spike and then subside, and
yeah, and it happens all the time when a guy is okay. Let's say you're playing a sport of some sort. Yeah. I was a wrestler back in the day. When you won a match and they were raising your hand at the end, there was this surge, this feeling like nothing else, this feeling of dominance, and it was a testosterone rush. On the other hand, losers in these kind of competitions, and they find that this happens even in games like, chess and dominoes. Right. There's this crash of testosterone that's really unpleasant. And sports fans experience this all the time when their teams win and lose. When you see all these riots going on after big games, what you're seeing basically is a lot of young men full of testosterone and usually alcohol running around acting out on it. It's something that happens to guys all the time. So
this kind of begs the question, and this is like a common theme that I was thinking through as I was reading your article. And we can go through some of the specifics of some of the biology and some of the evolutionary evidence that you talk about, but or adaptations, I should say. But are we? So if you look at, and we'll just pick the male testosterone thing for a second. Society has progressed, right? Where we no longer, it seems to me anyway, we no longer need, this type of, hormonal response, which I'm assuming was there for survival purposes originally, or procreation, right? So it all comes down to, I feel like, survival and sex and, keeping the species alive. And it all kind of boils down to those basic tenets. Is it a mismatch? Are we in like this mismatch of where our genetics and our biology is still thinking we're wrestling lions for survival and things like that, or the species is going to die off, so you need to impregnate women and do all this stuff that quote unquote today is considered barbaric? Are we at that mismatch where society? I literally drew. I'm kind of a geek. I kind of drew out this like XY, on the little map, like. On the x-axis going left to right is time, and on the y-axis is progress, or whatever, and society is kind of like a slow. I'm sorry, our genetics are a slow kind of it's a slow slope going from left to right, but society's progress and where we are today versus 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago is kind of almost exponentially going up, or at least the slope is much steeper, and that delta between the two seems to be a seems to be a problem with a lot of things. Does that make sense? I mean, is that
yeah,
am I way off with that?
no, there's something called mismatch theory that talks about a lot of our problems, mental health issues in particular, are the result of the difference between the world that we now live in, a large, you're exposed to strangers all the time, and you're
Right.
surrounded by media and all these things that didn't exist. You don't know everybody in your world face to face personally. And that's what we're kind of designed to deal with. So there's a mismatch. We're walking around with caveman brains in the 21st century. Now, getting back to the issue of the testosterone, though, and the aggression. First of all, I will avoid using the word that society has progressed. I will say society has changed. Progress implies that what we are now is better
right.
than what our hunter-gatherer world was. And that's kind of a value judgment that you could debate.
Sure.
But the only way that this goes away is if there's some kind of selection pressure against the effects of testosterone. Now, remember, when we're talking about these testosterone surges to meet challenges,
right,
it isn't just about being violent. This is the thing that makes you compete for status in the business world. It's the thing that makes you compete for recognition in the scientific world. High status guys still have more access to women and access to more desirable women than low status guys. And the testosterone is the thing that feeds that. And so I think there is still this male competition going on big time. It isn't necessarily two guys going out and having a club fight like it was 10,000 years ago. But the role of testosterone is exactly the same. But the guys that are losers or perceive themselves as being cut out of this competition, the desperate motivation plays out in things like mass shootings. So yes, there's a mismatch, but it still kind of serves men well to be able to rally the troops, so to speak, to meet challenges to their status when they're competing with other men.
Right. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, the delta between progress and change, that was an interesting, I think, detail you brought out there. Because yeah, progress, you would say, I think we've progressed. Now we live longer. People don't die of nearly the same amount of things. But is that, from just a strictly biological perspective, is that better? Who knows? You would think, but yeah, I appreciate that distinction. So I guess now your article goes through several different, I think how you kind of describe, there's some subcomponents of the article. The precarious manhood, competitive drives, young male syndrome, and then you add guns to the mix. Now, so as I was reading through this, again, you were talking through. First of all, I guess let's just define what precarious manhood is. I don't know who coined that term, because that was pretty interesting.
There were Jennifer Bosson is a social psychologist who published the first article that I'm aware of where that term was used.
Okay, yeah. Yep.
And the idea that, once you have won the right to be a man, it's not a permanent thing. You got to wake up tomorrow and there's another challenge, and you can be humiliated and lose all your status very easily. And so that's why your reputation, the fear of being thought of as a coward or a loser, is such a driving force for men.
Right, and then you take in competitive drives. Right, it's the next. I'm looking. I don't know if there was any. I mean, generally speaking, I think you mentioned something with this sound evolutionary reason that young men find themselves especially concerned with status and dominance. I mean, so I'm assuming that was based on procreation and survival.
Yeah. Okay. Evolution is entirely about reproductive fitness, getting those genes into the next generation. And from all accounts that we get from anthropologists who study this, almost all early human societies were organized in some kind of polygamous way, just like hunter-gatherer societies that still exist today are, where the high status guys get a bunch of wives. And I sometimes ask my student, is polygamy a better deal for men or for women? And they look at you and say, well, duh, for men. And then I reply by saying, well, which men? Because let's say you've got an equal number of men and women in the population, and one guy at the top has 4 wives,
Yeah, there's 3 other
that means
guys that don't. Yeah.
they don't get any.
Right.
And so you've got to be one of those guys that get the wives. And in the world we evolved in, you were born into this little tribe of maybe 150 or 200 people, and you were going to be there your whole life.
Mm.
And you're going to be competing with your age cohort your whole life. So let's say there's a dozen of you that are within 2 or 3 years of each other in age, and you're male. And in your teenage years, you're sorting out who is going to be the guy that gets the 5 or 6 wives and who's going to be the loser.
Right.
And so that's one of the reasons evolution has shaped young males to be full of testosterone, because that's the time at which you've got to be able to meet these challenges. And it just wasn't going to be possible at the age of 40 to move away and join another group and start over. So it was a life and death competition. That's one of the reasons people never forget high school.
Right.
You remember the emotional traumas and the concern about being popular and status. That's a holdover of that. And so you had to show what you had early in life. Excuse me. And so the kind of risky behavior, the show-off behavior that guys do, even when they're not being violent, there's a method to the madness. If you can put your life on the line and take stupid risks and survive them, you're demonstrating that maybe you've got some pretty good genes going on.
Right.
There's also a funny thing called the crazy bastard hypothesis. If you see a guy behaving in a reckless fashion with no regard whatsoever for his safety and well-being, think about going into battle.
Right.
Do you want the crazy bastard on your side or on the other side?
Yeah, absolutely. Give me him.
Yeah.
I want him.
And so by being a crazy bastard, you're essentially advertising to other men, I'm somebody you want as an ally. You want me on your side. And this status one gets with one's other men translates into success with women. I don't think women in particular are impressed by violence or disgusting behavior or stupid behavior, but other men are as impressed as hell by it.
Right.
And that status that you get from other men translates into success with women.
Well, interesting. So I actually took a note here where you're talking the success and the that crazy behavior that being a quote unquote winner gets you the women back in the day, and obviously today status is this thing as well. But just looking back in time to keep it, keep the misogyny feelings out of this conversation a little, because I don't want. I'm already ready for those comments, by the way. But whatever,
sure.
Right?
Yep.
Whatever.
Still get them, no doubt.
Good old internet. But get the women, get the wives. Is that because the women are? I think you just touched on it. I wrote a note here. Are the women more impressed with those men that are the tougher, the stronger, the more successful, or is it that the men around that successful guy kind of back down a little bit? Or is it a little bit of both?
Well, all right. Put yourself in the woman's position in the prehistoric world in which we evolved. All right. You're going to be pregnant and you're going to be caring for small children, and you're in a much more vulnerable position physically. Men are bigger and stronger. You need a guy who's got a lot of different qualities. So the bigger and stronger he is, the better he can protect you. Also, the better warrior he is, the better hunter he is, the better he's going to be able to provide resources for you and your children. And a guy with status in his male peer group is going to have powerful allies that's going to help keep him there. And so from a polygamy point of view, would you rather be the third wife of a influential, powerful guy with access to resources, or the only wife of a loser?
Right.
Now, don't ask my wife that question. But and so, yes, the ideal situation for the woman is I have this great guy with great genes and a lot of resources, and he's all mine.
Mm-hmm.
But having access to him, even if you have to share that, may still be a better option for you than this guy that's totally lacking in respect, who's a terrible hunter.
Right.
And see, women don't have the same pressure under a system like this as men do. A lot of men get completely shut out of the mating market in this kind of society.
Mm.
The top guys hog up females. But if you're a female, no matter how desirable or undesirable you may be, there will be a desperate guy willing to take you on because there are so many disenfranchised males. So women didn't have that same concern about finding a mate at all. They just had to make sure they could find the best one they could find.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. No, it's now. How do you navigate? And we'll get to the mass shooting concept, in a second here. But everything we're discussing, if you fast forward to 2020, I always like putting a current lens on things because I feel like we all too often. No one's talking about this like on in the media or anything like that, and I don't know. And I think I took one of the notes I sent you. I don't know how they would even do it. So this is not a dig against the medium. We could dig against them in a million different ways, but this is not really one of them. It's almost like everything that we're talking about has obvious. There's kind of a causation here to current young males and their behavior. I think you'd be insane to say, oh, that has nothing to do with the way they act today. They're just being stupid. There is this, I think, common just blanket statement, and I think it's a little bit damaging to not to at least understand some of these tendencies that males have. Number one, it just helps you better understand whether it's kids going crazy, they can't sit still in the classroom, they're punching each other. Not to say that you don't discipline against that, and you say and you make it known that is not okay behavior. But I think understanding that there is proclivities there that we shouldn't just ignore. But how do you? I guess, and I don't know if there's I don't know how you incorporate that into whether it's policy or I don't want to ever at all give the idea that what I'm saying is, oh, men are more violent, so you need to let them. No, but completely dismissing that there's a proclivity there, I think leads us to kind of blindness in a sense. Is that making sense? Like, how do how do you even navigate that conversation without sounding like you're giving excuse to it all?
No, I understand completely. I have these conversations all the time.
Same.
Part of the problem is, and this is more coming from the left than the right, politically speaking, is people are very invested in minimizing differences between males and females. Mm-hmm. And if you start going down the road of saying, okay, men are more violent than women for sound evolutionary reasons, then you're opening the door to saying that women are different from men in some ways that might be undesirable as well. And that feeds the fear that this could be used then to keep women powerless and to prevent them from achieving. Right. And therefore, it's easier to just close the door to this whole conversation.
Right. Which is the current state of things, which I think is absolute nonsense. Like, let's not look at the data and actually be smart about things for the fear that the data is going to be used in a way that I don't want. Well, the folks that are using the data in a way you don't want are the jerks, right? They're the ones that should be shut down, not the people finding data and just doing the scientific method, right? And yeah, it's you're exactly right. I mean, but I think folks like you and I need to just continue the narrative that data is data. Use it. If someone's going to use it for the wrong thing, that should not in any way squash the search for the extraction of data. Frankly, I mean,
and people have used data in the wrong way, including scientists, and that is a risk. But to then say, well, I'm not going to pay any attention to data doesn't do us any good. Also, while we were talking about this, it occurred to me, in some ways we talk about this, and I don't mean you and me right now, but I mean people in general, in a overly simplistic way that, okay, men are just violent, as if they're kind of out there mindlessly killing. Right. There's a method to the madness, and some kinds of killing are still sanctioned, even in our society. We give congressional medals of honor to war heroes who go and kill people that we as a group decide we want killed. Mm-hmm. And so we still very much value male violence. We just want to channel it in the right directions. And so the culture that you're in can have a big impact on how this plays out. There's some interesting research on something called cultures of honor. where a guy grows up where his reputation is especially important. And these overall are more violent cultures, but violent in a particular way. And for example, the roots of this, herding societies typically are more violent than agricultural societies. So if your people made their living by herding sheep or cattle, there was much more male-to-male violence and killing going on than if they were growing crops. And the reason for that is if you're in a society where the things that are valuable, the resources that matter, are easily stolen, you need to be one tough son of a bitch. So if I'm a sheep herder, and if somebody is thinking about stealing some sheep, they better not even consider stealing my sheep, because I need to establish a reputation as somebody that's going to take some violent action to prevent this from happening. Because sheep are easy to steal. It's harder to steal a cornfield.
Right.
Run away with it.
Right.
And so there wasn't the same kind of pressure. So cultures of honor make a man's reputation especially important, and you advertise your toughness and virility at any opportunity. And a lot of the research on this has been done in the United States, looking at, you hate to say that it lines up this way, but red states versus blue states. People, men in the South and in the West, seem to be growing up in a culture of honor much more than people in the North, the blue states. And this goes back to the historical roots of those places. We're kind of going off on a tangent here, but the South was originally populated by Scotch-Irish herders and landed English gentry who had a history of dueling, and honor was a very big deal. The North was mostly populated by farmers. And so you have this cultural difference that goes way back. Now, obviously, the populations are very different now, but the sort of traditions and laws were crafted by the history of the place. And so violence is more acceptable. Some kinds of violence are more acceptable in some places than others.
Right. Yeah, I did not know that about that. Yeah. It's easier to steal a sheep than a cornfield.
And so if you don't want your sheep stolen, you better be, you got to be a scary guy.
Well, but I mean, if you, and it's, and I don't know, and every, guys, even amongst guys in general, we're all different, but generally speaking, if I get a group of my guy friends around and, you start talking about, hear a story about, someone broke into someone's house, 10 years ago, and they hurt the wife or the kids, like the guys, we all almost in unison just get, that rage, that desire to protect our own and protect the family and all the stuff I think you think that good men should do. It's so overwhelming that and it's a good thing.
And if that has happened and you did not protect your family, if for some reason you could not save them, the shame that you experience as a result of that, again, precarious manhood.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah. I've had this discussion and I think probably me just more because I really enjoy the evolutionary look at things and the biology of things, and I have a lot of weird interests. But I've said this before too. God forbid something happened to my family and I was incapacitated, right? And I just couldn't help them, and some other guy was able to do what he wanted to do. That's one of my biggest fears, right? It's one of my biggest fears because I think, and that. There's no doubt it's related to what we're talking about here. I mean, it's just that.
Oh, it's entirely related to that.
100%. Yeah, it scares us.
Well, and we're always walking around as men, assessing our ability to do what needs to be done if it were necessary. When you ask guys to think, have they thought about whether they could win a fight with other men that they know? Could you beat up your friends? If you had to, not that you want to do that, but if it came down to it, men almost always report, yeah, I've thought of that. When you ask women that question, you get the occasional woman will say, oh yeah, I've thought about whether I could kick her ass or not. but I do this in my class. I pose that question. I say to the guys, have you ever thought about this? And there's this nodding of the heads and, oh yeah. And then the women kind of look puzzled when I asked the question. And I had one very memorable situation where this young woman was exasperated. She couldn't believe that men went around doing this. And she said to them, well, What what about your fathers? And in unison, the guys in the class said, "Oh yeah." I mean, there was this clear.
Whether the fathers thought about that?
But no, no, whether they thought about whether they could beat up their
Oh,
father or not.
yeah. Right.
And and so yeah, this is something that just is part of what we do.
Yeah.
You're always assessing. I mean, you're always calculating your ability to deal with danger of any sort,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
What would I do if this happened? What would I do if that happened? But men in particular in this kind of situation think about, could I physically handle the situation the way I would want?
Right. Yeah, and for women, unfortunately, they need to depend on a lot of them anyway. And at least I know my wife's she's not a physical person. She doesn't think like I'll wrestle him to the ground. And, and I love when I see women that are just training and they're like, they want to be strong and they don't want to be afraid of that. Cause I think women have a very unfair, position in this world where just walking to their car at night, they have to think in a way that I don't really have to. Right.
Exactly.
And it's
Yep.
even my wife just came back from a small trip and, it's like, I want to ride home my sister because X, Y, and Z, and walking back to the car. And I'm like, wow, that constant fear, and we live in a very safe area. So there's not a lot to worry about. We're lucky enough. But in general, I'm like, I'll go for a run at midnight. I don't care. And I don't really have to think about that.
There's a whole different set of predators out there for.
Yeah, it's true. So you've kind of laid out a case for, men have this, I guess, proclivity for some of the violence that takes place, and unfortunately sometimes results in these mass shootings. Now, again, we're not making an excuse for any of this. We're not talking political. Now, you go through a bunch of, obviously, like I said, you build up to the case, then you say adding guns to the mix. So if you take now, the one thing I kind of was thinking about as reading through, there's obviously a bunch of these precursors, these genetic things there that would make men do this stuff and not women. Because I think, have there been any? I don't really follow this, to be honest. I just, it gets so political. I actually look the other way sometimes. Obviously, mass shootings are an abomination. We should do whatever we can to get rid of them to minimize that risk. But I don't follow the details and some of the stats. Are there any? Have there been women? Any women?
Very, very few. There was this one in California some years ago where there was a couple, a male and a female.
Okay, yeah.
Engaged. And it was more sort of terrorist related. And I would like to talk a little bit about the difference between mass shootings driven by ideology versus those that aren't, because I think they're very different. And there was also a woman, she's known as the YouTube shooter, who went into the YouTube offices and opened fire on people. She was a former employee. But yeah, there aren't many. It's very much a guy thing.
Right. Because I obviously read through your article and I had, and then I said, well, I don't know what the current profile is of. Now I knew there were males. That I think anyone just generally paying attention would know that these are mostly males, if not all males. But I didn't know the actual profile of them, and I just found a Vice news article. I think Vice is relatively center, maybe a little bit left to center. Because I always wonder you never know where people are coming from, where the source is coming from. I feel like Vice is relatively centerish.
I guess I've actually published in Vice, but I guess I don't know enough about their readership to know for sure which way they go. They're clearly not labeled at either extreme.
Right, 100%. Yeah, exactly.
So whether they lean a little more one way or the other, I'm not sure.
Yep.
But yeah, the profile is it's male and it's young male. One of the reasons the Las Vegas shooter was kind of an anomaly is he was an older guy. I think he was 63 years old or something. And that's really unusual. I mean, it's almost always a young male thing.
Right. And white males, it seems like most of the categories are white males. Is that also true?
That does tend to be true, but there are
some exceptions.
There are more non-white males than there are women.
For sure. Right. Yeah. The 5 categories that Vice gave was and there's different locations and types where these shootings occur. And K through 12, they're white males. College universities, non-white males, which I guess is an exception there. Workplace shooters, they said 40-something males, I guess because they probably have worked there, and so they were a little mature in their career. Places of worship, white males. in the 40s, and then commercial locations is white men in the 30s. Now, again, that's one data point. I don't know how that would overlay with other studies, but it's just a general.
Well, one way of thinking about that is if you think about the thing that's driving the act, it's a scream for recognition. It's outrage over not feeling that one has the status or entitlement that one should have.
Yep.
And so the guys in their 40s who've been on the job for a while start feeling disrespected, right? And it makes sense that they would be more easily ruffled by a lack of status than a guy who's 22 who just started there. So let me just say something about the ideology thing again. I think the guy who is this mass shooter who goes back to where he works and the terrorist, a jihadi or whatever, white nationalist, whatever kind of terrorist you want to talk about, are driven by the same thing, but their targets are different. If I'm feeling disrespected by the people in my life, I am regularly made fun of, I'm ostracized, I feel like a loser. This last desperate thing that I do is a way of trying to say, I am a person to be reckoned with. You need to know who I am and you need to be afraid of me. And these people tend to go back to the places where they felt disrespected. They go back to their high school. They go back to the place they work. They go back and kill people they know or people who are in places where they know people. And that's a very different situation than the terrorist. Now, the terrorist is most often, again, a young male who is on the margins of society. These are not guys who, for the most part, had rich, comfortable lives. They feel like losers. They get sucked up into these movements, and it gives them a chance to be somebody.
Right.
I'm going to go out there and do God's work. And they will then go to wherever the people that their group hates are, whether it's a church or a synagogue or a shopping mall full of Hispanic people like we had in El Paso last year, or you go where the infidels are if you're an Islamic terrorist. And you're not going back to places where you grew up killing people you know. You're killing the enemy.
Killing the other, yeah.
But in each case, it's an effort on the guy's part to make a statement about being a person to be reckoned with.
Yeah, and you, I think you had one or two sentences here that I think summarize the blog super nicely, and I'll just read it because I think it really summarizes the whole thing we're talking about. But and then I had a question on this because there's one thing that we don't think you touched on in the article, but I'm just wondering what your thoughts are. But you summarized by saying apparently a lack of attention from others results in a lack of status, resulting in a lack of access to women. Combined with a young man's testosterone, it creates a toxic combustible mix. Obviously, you add guns to that, and it's just a disaster at times. Now. So, and that pretty much summarized, I think, a lot of what we talked about already. But I'm wondering, so obviously, a lot of these folks are disenchantized. These men, they're not feeling heard. They're ostracized. Many of us can feel that way growing up, especially high school. Those formative years where that desire to belong is not there for, I would say, a lot of us, right? We all go through that weird, I went through a goofy stage. I mean, we all have that, you brought up high school, and I've been thinking about that because it's true how that is such a important part of our stage of development. But how does, one thing that we didn't kind of touch on is, since many of us can go through that and many of us would never consider doing something as crazy as a mass shooting, how these, like, what's the home life effect? Is there a dad present? Is there a mom present? Is there, what I mean? Like, is that something a little bit outside of the scope of that article? But I'm sure you have thoughts or data on it.
Yeah.
I got to imagine the home life can rectify. I'm a big fan of, most things, most of the shaping or pretty much all of it, I should say, should come from the home, at least to a certain age. So breakdown of the family tends to lead to all kinds of things. So what are your thoughts there on how that's kind of related here?
Sure. Yeah. And I'm just free associating on this because that wasn't the focus of the article. But I think whether one acts out on this is a combination of dozens of different factors. You're right. Many of us have been humiliated and felt less important than we think we should, and we don't go out and start killing a lot of people. And so you've got to add together a whole lot of different ingredients for that to happen. When it comes to the family, I would think, and again, this is speculation on my part, we don't have data, but to the extent that the family can also make the guy feel like a loser, that's going to push him even further in that direction. Mm-hmm. So if you're regularly communicating to your unemployed, unpopular son how ashamed you are of him and what a loser you think he is, if anything, that's going to stoke the fire even more than if you're kind of supportive and giving him, if he doesn't have status anywhere else, at least if he feels loved and respected within his own family, right, that's something. But the guys who just don't feel like there's anywhere that they can turn and matter, I think are the ones at greatest risk. Yeah. So I don't think it's just a question as simple as, is there a dad present or not? I think it might actually be better to have a dad be absent than to have the wrong dad present, mm-hmm. Depending on the situation.
Sure. Yeah. No, I'm just curious with that. I'm just going to Google around after this, just because that's interesting. I don't know none of the profiles, or at least the basic top level profiling of the folks committing these atrocities. I didn't see a lot of that reference to family life and things. I didn't dig too deep into it, but.
Well, and part of the problem with this is it's hard to do good research on this, right? Because you have to you wait for the mass shooting to happen, and then you take whatever you've got there. And how do you really know exactly what the relationship was between the shooter and his father, for example? Right. And you're dealing with, relatively small number of cases, thankfully. So, it's just hard to draw any firm conclusions about it. And plus, there's been discouragement. The federal government wouldn't even fund any research on shootings because the gun lobby has prevented that from happening. So, there just hasn't been a lot of support for finding answers to this.
Yeah. So what do you, do you see, are you optimistic? Are you, obviously in your world versus the, policy-making world are very different worlds, but do you, are the two work, is there any, maybe it is today, do the policies and lawmakers on Capitol Hill, do they have any interaction with the psychology community? Or even if they do, is it just kind of in, to checking a box? Because I think things like we're talking about, again, none of this is an excuse for anything, but it should inform policy, should increase understanding and things like that. Is there any of that in place?
I would have to say I'm sort of discouraged about that. Now, I'm not going to say that there are no policymakers ever who aren't interested in finding out what's going on, but what I see more commonly, if we're talking about politicians, is they've already decided what they think the case is and what they want the case to be. Right. And when they go and consult with scientists, they're looking for information to support a position they already have. Mm-hmm. And they just sort of disregard information that doesn't
Confirmation
fit.
Bias,
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And so I have not seen a lot of genuine curiosity about discovering how things really are. What I see is I already know how things are. I need some ammunition here to make my argument stronger.
Right. Or my constituents think this is how it goes, so I need to support what, and I by effect think that, whether I do or not, who knows? But
the people who donate to my campaign already know what they want to know. So
I was looking for a little light at the end of the tunnel here, but you just threw some.
Well, I'm not saying it can't change, but right now I'm not a sunny optimist in any area of my life. So it's not surprising, perhaps, that suddenly in this area I would be.
All right. No, I think I agree with you. I think that's the current state, and I don't think the system's set up to really. It takes time. That's why science is one thing and politics is another. I think science is a slow, methodical process by which you look for things and you find things that contradict your previous things. So you got to look further and further and further and spend more and more time to try to get where ground truth is. And politics, I think, is almost is the polar opposite of that. So unfortunately, the latter are the ones making policy and laws that affect our everyday life. And I would just hope that the former, your world, at least informs the political side. But yeah,
Well, we'll keep trying.
yeah. I
Maybe.
guess never give up, right? So I guess in summary, what do you have? We didn't really introduce you, as at the beginning there, like I normally do. But do you have any books coming out, or like, is this a main focus of yours, or what is your main focus in your day to day?
Well, right now I'm studying two different topics: gossip and creepiness. Those are probably where I'm doing most of my research right now. The idea being that gossip is sort of an inherent part of human nature. And I think of it as a character, not a character flaw, but a social skill. It's only when you don't do it well that you get in trouble. And so I've been doing a series of experiments on what kind of gossip we want about what kind of people and why. Also, this has an evolutionary perspective. But I'm also interested in the experience of being creeped out and being creeped out by people or places. And how is this experience different from some other emotions like fear or disgust? And why do we spend a lot of money to go to horror movies and watch people we'd avoid like the plague in real life? So these are the kinds of questions I'm interested in. I'm still interested in the aggression stuff, and I obviously do interviews and a little popular press writing about it. But right now, I'm not doing a whole lot of research on it.
Interesting. Yeah, so the creepiness thing was interesting to me because when you originally had sent some of the ideas for our discussion, I almost chose the creepiness side, and not so much the haunted house and the horror film and that kind of side of it, but the a few of your articles talking about how it's very easy for women to be creeped out by men, but almost rarely in reverse. So that's a good tie into our discussion. And I'll just ask you one question on that. And this we don't have to go too far on this one, but we can wrap up in a sec. But is when a woman is creeped out by a man, and frankly, I've been creeped out by other guys too, but not in a I felt threatened way, but more like, dude, this dude is not right kind of thing. But I feel like when women say this guy is creepy, I feel like they're saying at some level they're saying I don't feel safe or I feel sexually threatened or something. Are those the general tenets of what creepiness would mean from a woman saying it?
Yeah, this is very much like the conversation you were having before about women walking around alone at night. Whether you're a male or a female, men are more dangerous to you, right? So if you're a guy, you're more likely to be attacked or killed by a guy than by a woman. If you're a woman, you're at greater risk of harm from a man than from a woman. So if we think of creepiness as kind of an early warning system against threat, we're going to be on our guard against men more than women. And in my research, I did find that women very commonly report when they encounter a person they think is creepy, they feel a sexual threat of some sort. Men tend not to report that. As you said, this guy's just not right, but you don't think he has some sort of perverse sexual interest in you. For women, that's a much more common fear.
Right.
And creepiness is really all about just not knowing how to act in the situation. You're wallowing in discomfort. If you're talking to somebody who's sending off a creepy vibe, well, maybe they're just kind of an awkward person. And to start screaming and running away from them would seem kind of rude. But on the other hand, if there is something to be screaming and running away from, you shouldn't hang around. It's kind of frozen there. You don't know what to do.
Well, it's true. I've observed it. I mean, especially when I was younger, now older, married, I'm not in these circles anymore, but younger, being in those, a lot of those situations where the men are pretty much all looking to pick up the women, you just see there's some creeps out there. And the ones that are just not charismatic and just not very good looking, and they do, and I would say they tend to we all at that age, in that group of men, basically everyone at their bar or at the club, wherever you are at that point in your life, the men all have one thing on their mind, right? Generally speaking, right? Just people could say no. I'm like, well, you're just trying to be PC. That's not true. Trust me, I was there. Every guy I talked to, we don't admit it because it's not okay to talk about this stuff.
Well, maybe there's more than one thing, but
that
one
thing is
is
dominating. There's a reason. Yeah. Anyway, 100%. So I can see from the woman's perspective that how many just creeps are up that would just come across and just I witnessed it. Like, what is that guy doing? Like, they're not even good at it, and they're just
this is a problem for the guy, right? Because if you're in the bar trying to meet women and pick them up, you're very aware of how easily you can be perceived as a creep.
Right.
And this kind of makes you nervous, and you don't act normally because you're worried about being a creep.
Right.
And that can be the very thing that makes you seem creepy.
You're overthinking. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and from the woman's perspective, it's hard to tell the difference between the real creep and the awkward guy who's afraid of being the creep. So why take a chance? Let's treat them both the same way.
Exactly. Oh, funny. I'm kind of glad those days are behind me. That's for sure. Not kind.
Hey, I'm still a creep.
Harmless creep, though, right?
Well, I hope so. Of course, creeps. Another thing we found on our research: most people think creepy people don't know they're creepy.
I would agree with that. I think if you are truly self-aware, I think self-awareness is one of the best, one of the hidden secrets to anyone's success, no matter what you're doing, is being self-aware how you're perceived. So if you were coming across creepy and you were very self-aware, you would immediately stop whatever you were doing or adjust to be not creepy, and then I think you'd accomplish your goal most successfully, whatever that might be. But yeah, interesting. Well, Frank, thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Yeah,
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
And we're wrapped up. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. I'll check you out next time. See you.